Hello and welcome back to my channel, Liberia Library, where I talk about all my favorite comic book stories. Today's is one that I have been trying to work out for a while. I just didn't know how to start it. I thought about just skipping it out of my own frustrations, but after rereading the story, it had just stuck with me. So I've decided to do my best, because I feel like this story is an important one that is just as relevant now as it was when it came out, and probably still will be in 10, 15, 20 years. This is a coming-of-age love story, but so much more than that. It's a story about violence in its many forms, and how those violent acts have consequences and ruin lives. The two main protagonists in this story are not heroes, which I feel was the point the creators were trying to get across, and did a fantastic job of doing so. So like, subscribe, and share if you enjoy the content. And let's finally get into We Can Never Go Home. The story was created by writers Matthew Rosenberg, Patrick Kindlon, and artist Josh Hood. The first issue was put out by a small company called BlackMask Studios on December 22nd, 2015. Our story begins with Duncan, one of our main characters. He's kind of an outcast loser with no friends, which is more than likely because of his home life. His mother had died and his father is abusive. I would have liked to hear more about his parents because we don't get much info. They are key components that set the story in motion. But then again, it isn't that big of a deal, I guess, since the story is more about where our characters are going and less about where they had been. When we first see Duncan, he's playing with his dad's gun on top of the local lookout point, which you will see him throughout the story barely without. I feel like it makes him feel safe or powerful, because everywhere the kid goes, he's bullied. The kid's at school, then comes home, gets bullied by his dad. So the gun is more or less like a security blanket for him. We see a truck pull up, and for whatever reason, be it curiosity or perversion, Duncan sneaks up and peeks through the window. He sees two of his classmates going at it, and this is when we first meet our other protagonist, Madison. She's a strong and independent girl. Not a great home life, but nowhere near as bad as Duncan. She's fairly normal, except for a secret she was born with that nobody else knows. When she was a little girl, she started developing powers. It's never described how or why, but they are tied to her emotions. When she gets scared or angry, she develops superhuman strength and rock-hard skin. Madison's boyfriend catches Duncan watching them and jumps out of the car. She tries to get him to calm down and forget about it, but Duncan keeps antagonizing him. He then shoves Madison to the ground, which triggers her powers. She just couldn't hold it back. She gets up and throws him with one hand like he was nothing. He was understandably freaked out and said he was going to tell the whole school, then drives off, leaving Madison stranded with Duncan. They begin to walk back to town together. Duncan was obviously into her, but just wasn't able to break the ice, which was also understandable since he was trying to watch her and her boyfriend go at it. He then begins asking about her powers, and we get this really great moment where Duncan brings up how she can do great things with those powers. It upsets her. She says she's already doing great things. Madison had worked her ass off to get a scholarship and get out of this town. So as popular as she is at school, Madison still just feels so lost, like she doesn't belong. With or without powers, most of us can relate to this at some point in our lives. Duncan uses this opportunity to tell her how he can kill people with his mind, how he did it to his mom. At this moment, the two start finally connecting. Madison feels like she has someone who can understand her, a friend she could trust. Remember this for later. At school, Madison is now being treated like a freak. Her ex-boyfriend knew nobody would believe his story, so he made up a new one about how she attacked him and scratched up his face. Duncan had had enough. He confronts Madison's ex-boyfriend, saying his story was BS, that he actually got too drunk to get it up. Well, her ex then begins to wail on Duncan over and over again. Knowing he couldn't do anything about it, Duncan just laid there and took it, until Madison grabs her ex's arm and breaks up the fight. She then walks Duncan home. The next day during lunch, Duncan goes up to Madison's table and hands her something. It was a mixtape he had made for her of all of his favorite bands. He's picked on and made fun of by her friends as usual, but he gives it right back to them. Hanging out with Madison had brought out more confidence in him. Madison didn't have a tape player to play the mixtape, but waiting for her when she got home was a box. And inside the box was Duncan's old tape player. She wanted to thank him, but also wanted an excuse to leave the house. Her mom was being just as annoying as ever. So instead of waiting till tomorrow, she headed over to Duncan's right away, which seemed to be perfect timing. Through the window she could see Duncan's father, hands around his son's throat. He was going to kill him. Madison busts through the wall. She then hits him as hard as she could in the face, twisting his neck and breaking it. He died before hitting the floor. Duncan then held her and thanked her. His dad would have killed him if it wasn't for Madison. She wanted to call the police, tell them what she had done, but Duncan said no. She had said it herself, that if anybody had found out what she can do, she would be locked away and experimented on. So Duncan had a plan. Madison had saved his life, and now it was time for him to save hers. I think that this was Duncan's plan all along. To some extent at least, because he already had some sort of plan and didn't hesitate for a second. And honestly, I can't blame him for wanting to run away. But the only thing is, usually running away from your problems makes things worse. And the longer you do it, the worse things become. In Duncan's case, this violent act will lead to far more. And in the process, he is not only going to ruin his life, but Madison's as well. Before they go through with Duncan's plan, Maddie convinces him to take her home to gather some of her things. After all, if she's never coming back to this town, she would need a change of clothes. Her mom begins fighting with her the moment she walks in the door. Maddie had been on the fence about running away until that moment. Her mom just helped her make that decision. She never wanted to argue with her ever again. Her father hugs her and comforts her. He knows he could never make her stay. He just wanted her to be careful and take care of herself. Maddie and Duncan then leave and head to a gas station since they would probably need to drive all through the night. While Maddie was inside buying snacks, Duncan runs into Ben, her ex-boyfriend, outside. Ben threatens him, but this time, Duncan had his gun. He puts it to Ben's chin, and it was written all over his face. He felt in control, powerful, like nobody could touch him. It felt like to Duncan, his life had taken a turn for the best. But kids are stupid, as we will see later. Maddie walks out of the store, and they both leave, but not before spraying Ben with gasoline. Duncan tells her he would have never hurt him, he just wanted to scare him. But I'm not so sure. Finally, they get to the next phase of Duncan's plan. They had food, gas, all they needed now was money. So his plan was to rob a local drug dealer. The guy had duffel bags full of cash. It would be perfect. He thought because the guy would never report it, and even if he did, Duncan figured nobody would care. Maddie didn't really want to steal, but didn't really have much of a choice. So she busts down the door, flinging a dealer behind it across the room. The guy tells them the people he works for would torture them, then kill their families. They begin to search the house, then a big bald man emerges from the bathroom with a duffel bag in his hand. Maddie hits the guy, but it wasn't like last time. He shrugs it off. He could tell she was strong, but didn't have any kind of combat training. He gets her on the ground. Duncan then shoots him in the back of the head, and Maggie throws him off. She was not okay. She was in shock. The man's blood was all over her face. Maddie was beginning to think all of this was a bad idea. That was 2 people dead because of her and Duncan. She really just wanted to turn herself in. Until Duncan reveals to her the duffel bag full of money. It was more than either of them had ever seen, and the mere sight of it made Maddie completely forget that she had just killed 2 people. In that moment, all her worries dissipated. She couldn't wait to find an expensive hotel and just relax for a while. But that would draw too much attention. So the 2 found a cheap motel on the side of an interstate to lay low for the night and freshen up. Unfortunately, it didn't take long for the cops to find out where they were hiding. There was a knock on the door. Maddie knew exactly who was behind that knock, so she prepared herself. The cops then bust in weapons drawn. She kills all 3 of them. The rest outside open fire, but the bullets just bounce off her rock-hard skin. She tells Duncan to grab their stuff, while she goes outside to handle the rest. But she had scared them so bad they all took off running, and so they couldn't follow. Maddie threw their cars like they were just toys, but more were on the way, so they headed out as fast as they could. During all the confusion, Duncan had forgot to grab the duffel bag full of money, so they both were once again at square one. But there was a little good news. Duncan had taken an address book. Inside had the addresses of all the drug dealers' houses in the operation. So his brilliant idea was to do the same plan over again, because it worked so well last time. Duncan really believes him and Maddie are the good guys. He even gaslights her into believing they are a modern day Robin Hood, except they keep all the money. They even go shopping for a superhero costume for her. As you probably already guessed, Duncan isn't a great person. But I do actually believe that he thinks he is, and that the whole world is against him and Maddie. In his delusional mind, he is the hero. Two of the drug dens were close by, so they drove through the night and arrived at the crack of dawn. Maddie busts through the door like last time, waking up the dealer. He knew who they were. He was warned they might be coming. He gives up fairly easily, though not much he could do against Maddie anyway. The two then celebrate at a carnival a few miles away. It was the most perfect day Maddie had ever had. It was the first day ever that she wasn't afraid. Afraid that people might find out what she could really do. It was nice. Unfortunately, 3 idiots were about to ruin it. They begin to catcall and harass her. Duncan then reached for his security blanket, but Maddie stopped him. The biggest of the three then punched him in the face, and Maddie then broke his arm. Once again, Duncan reassures Maddie he wasn't going to shoot the guy, just scare him. She was really getting tired of Duncan putting her through so many violent situations. He apologized and said it wouldn't be like that during the next robbery. They would be way more careful. This made her angrier. He told her at the beginning of all this that he had a plan. When was he actually going to execute it? Well, apparently, this was Duncan's plan. Running from the cops, living off stolen money, killing anyone who gets in their way. Frustrated and disappointed, Maddie storms out of the hotel room they had just rented, leaving Duncan by himself to think, even if he didn't think he had done anything wrong. A few minutes later, she comes back and begins to kiss Duncan. She then throws him on the bed. But it wasn't Maddie. She begins to shift, becoming an older blonde woman. She had powers just like them. She says her name is Casey, and she worked for the head of the drug operation that Chu had been stealing from. His name was Mr. Carroll, and he had taken an interest in both Maddie and Duncan. He could use people with their abilities, so he wanted to meet with them, and as a sign of good faith, he would let them keep all the money. Before Duncan could answer, Maddie comes running into the hotel room. She had called her father, but the call had been traced. The cops were on the way. But she got a shock when she opened the door to see Duncan naked and a pretty blonde on the bed. She completely forgot about the cops and storms out of the room. Duncan jumps in the car and heads out to find her. He ended up finding her not far from the motel in a neighborhood down the street. Maddie was hurt. Duncan told her he knew what it looked like, but he promised her it wasn't. He then begins to recount everything Casey had told him, including her being a shapeshifter. Still annoyed, but nowhere near as angry as she was, she tells Duncan about the phone call to her father, and how, more than likely traced by the cops. Suddenly they noticed a man standing in the road. He ripped through their car like paper, with his bare hands. Maddie goes flying through the windshield. 3 more men then appear. It looked like the cops had found them, and they had superhumans working for them. Maddie was knocked out cold. Duncan was disoriented and had a bloody nose, but overall fine. The agents didn't come to arrest them. They wanted to offer the two a deal. They needed help taking down the drug operation the kids were involved in, and in exchange, Duncan would go free. But Maddie had killed police officers, so it wasn't as easy to get her charges wiped. She would have to come work for the Federal Bureau. It was the best offer they were going to get, and Duncan was about to accept it, when suddenly Maddie awakens and takes them all out. They then hijack an elderly woman's car, but it wasn't actually an elderly woman. It was Casey. She takes him to the main compound to meet the boss, Mr. Carroll. He meets them at the front door, then takes them on a tour of the place. It was massive. It felt almost like another country. And Carroll seemed nice enough, so Duncan had made a decision to work for him. But the one they really wanted, or at least they said they wanted, was Maddie. But she still wasn't sure. Something just didn't feel right. The two are led to their rooms and locked in for the night, with a guard posted at each door. After all, the kids were still strangers, so it was just a precaution. The next morning, Carroll was already waiting in Maddie's room. He tells them both to get ready because there is going to be a membership conference, and he had hoped it would help change Maddie's mind. When the two arrived, he He has Maddie approach him in the middle of the room. He wanted to test her abilities, so he has her fight the biggest guy in the room, and she knocks him out with one punch. Another guy approaches her from behind and hits her in the back of the head. Then the whole room attacks her. She held her own as long as she could, even killed a few, but there were just too many. They eventually get her on the ground and beat her over and over and over again. She screams for Duncan's help. Why wasn't he using his powers? That's when Mr. Carroll explains that this was actually a test for Duncan. He wanted him to pick up the gun on the table and shoot all the men. If he doesn't, they will keep beating Maddie until she's dead. It's them or her, and then tears begin to run down Duncan's face. He then tells her to tough it out, to keep going just a little while longer. Finally, Carol tells them to stop. The kids had passed this insane test, but now Maddie knows Duncan had lied to her. He didn't have powers. Their whole relationship was just built on a lie. The whole reason she had come with him was because she thought they had this connection, this secret only the two of them could understand. But in reality, he had just used her, and now her life is over because of him. No, she wasn't going to stay here any longer with him and that crazy cult leader. She was leaving, but Carol had alluded to killing her if she doesn't play nice. So Duncan heads to her room later to warn her, but then tells her he was going to stay, that this is where he belongs and he would be fine, which was probably the only good thing he's ever done for her. He knows they're going to kill him, and very slowly, so it would give her a big head start. Maddie didn't believe him though. She finds a payphone and calls Agent Liley. He had given them a card with his number just in case they changed their minds. Back at the compound, Duncan had been beat almost non-stop for days, until he's finally saved by Casey. At that same moment, the feds had arrived and were in the middle of a shootout with Carol's men. The whole place was a war zone. While looking for a way out, Duncan runs into Liley. He tells Duncan it's over, that he's safe, and that Maddie was now the property of the US military. Well, Duncan didn't even hesitate. He shoots Liley through the chest, killing him. No matter how many chances this kid gets, he always seems to make things worse, which would just be dumb. But what makes it kind of evil is that he drags Maddie down with him, and this time is no exception. She finds him standing over Liley's body. He had just ruined their only way out, but he didn't see it that way. He saw it as a starting over point, but more agents were coming. Maddie told him to run, and she would hold them off, so he steals a cop car and escapes. We cut to 3 months later. Maddie was on trial for the death of Agent Jason Lilly, and Duncan was working at a diner in a small town in the middle of nowhere. On the TV, he sees that Maddie had escaped custody right before her trial, and it appears she had found him. He couldn't believe it. He wanted to run away with her and finally start their life together. But she had finally realized she was meant for more than just being someone's girlfriend or weapon. She then hands him a wad of cash and leaves. And this ends We Can Never Go Home. That ending was so satisfying, even if she was too easy on him. At least she realized all the shit she had gotten herself into, all the death and lies, just lead to more. Well, I hope she did anyway. And Duncan, it seemed like he didn't learn a thing. He was ready to pick up where they left off, which was frustrating, but in the end, he most definitely got what he deserved. The thing I feel he hates the most, being alone. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you did, and I'll see you in the next one.